The school auditorium was packed, the murmurs of eager students and their parents buzzing like a hive of bees. The annual charity auction was the pinnacle of the social calendar for Hampton Academy, a private school known for its luxurious events and equally wealthy attendees. Among the crowd stood Sophia Bennett, her chestnut hair styled in perfect waves, her designer dress hugging her figure like it had been tailored specifically for her. To anyone watching, she was the picture of grace and privilege, a girl born into wealth, effortlessly commanding attention. Tonight, however, Sophia was anything but calm. Her fingers gripped the edge of her clutch purse so tightly that her knuckles turned white. She stood near the refreshment table, avoiding the eyes of her classmates while trying to steady her breathing. The lie she had built so carefully over the past year was now hanging by a thread, and she could feel the tension in every fiber of her being. "Sophia, your family's donation is next," said Emma, her classmate and self-appointed leader of the school's social elite. Emma's smile was polite, but carried an undertone of challenge. Her perfectly manicured hand gestured toward the stage, where a dazzling array of auction items was being displayed. Sophia swallowed hard. "Of course," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. She turned to look at the stage, where the MC was enthusiastically describing each item. A vintage Rolex, a luxury vacation package to the Maldives, and a custom painting by a renowned artist. All of these items had been donated by families of the school's students, each one more extravagant than the last. Next up was the item Sophia had brought, a designer handbag supposedly from an exclusive, sold-out collection. The bag wasn't hers. It wasn't even her family's. Sophia had borrowed it from Leela, her friend who worked at a thrift store downtown. Leela had no idea that Sophia planned to pass it off as her family's donation. It was a desperate move, but Sophia hadn't seen another way out. Everyone at Hampton Academy believed she came from immense wealth, and tonight, that illusion had to remain intact. As the MC called her name, Sophia felt her stomach churn. She forced herself to step forward, every movement feeling heavy and deliberate. The audience turned their attention to her, their eyes glittering with curiosity and expectation. She could feel Emma's gaze boring into her, sharp and scrutinizing. Sophia managed a smile as she reached the microphone. "Our next item is a very special donation from the Bennett family," the MC announced with a flourish. "This limited edition handbag, valued at over $10,000, is a statement piece for any fashion lover. Let's start the bidding at $5,000. The applause was polite but subdued, and Sophia's heart pounded as the first bid came in. She prayed no one would question the bag's authenticity. But then, just as the bidding reached $8,000, a voice rang out from the back of the room. "Wait a second," a woman called out. The room fell silent. All eyes turned toward the source of the interruption. It was apparent, someone Sophia vaguely recognized from previous school events. The woman stood up, her expression skeptical. "Isn't that the same bag that was on display at the downtown thrift and vintage shop last week?" Sophia froze. Her mind raced as she struggled to come up with an explanation. I think you must be mistaken," she stammered, her voice trembling. "This bag was a gift from my father." "Oh, really?" the woman said, her tone dripping with disbelief. "Because I distinctly remember seeing that exact bag with a tag for sale at the shop. It even had a small scratch on the handle, just like this one." Sophia's stomach dropped. She glanced at the bag, and sure enough, there was the scratch, a tiny imperfection she had hoped no one would notice. The murmurs in the crowd grew louder, a wave of whispers that seemed to crush her from all sides. Emma stepped closer, her expression unreadable, but her eyes gleamed with something that looked like satisfaction. "Is there something you'd like to tell us, Sophia?" Emma asked, her voice soft but cutting. The microphone picked up every word, amplifying the question for the entire room to hear. Sophia's throat tightened. She looked out at the sea of faces, her classmates, their parents, and even her teachers, all staring at her with a mixture of curiosity and suspicion. For a moment, she considered running off the stage. escaping before anyone could dig deeper. But her legs felt rooted to the spot, and her mind was blank. The walls of her fabricated life were crashing down around her, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. She began, but the words caught in her throat. She felt hot tears pricking at the corners of her eyes. The audience waited, the tension so thick it was almost suffocating. Finally, the MC stepped in, attempting to defuse the situation. "Perhaps there's been some sort of mix-up," he said with an awkward chuckle. "Let's move on to our next item, shall we?" But the damage was done. As Sophia stepped off the stage, the whispers followed her like a cloud. Her classmates avoided her gaze, their expressions ranging from pity to disdain. Emma approached her, a faint smile playing on her lips. "That was interesting," Emma said, her voice laced with condescension. "You should really be more careful about the stories you tell, Sophia. People might start to question things." Sophia didn't respond. She hurried out of the auditorium, her cheeks burning with humiliation. Outside, the cool night air hit her like a slap in the face. She leaned against the wall, her breaths coming in short, ragged gasps. The truth she had fought so hard to hide was on the verge of being exposed, and she didn't know how much longer she could keep it buried. As she stood there, her phone buzzed with a new notification. It was a message from Leela. "Hey, just saw a post about the fundraiser." The message read, "Is that my bag on stage? What's going on, Sophia?" Sophia stared at the screen, her hands trembling. She had no idea how to respond. The lie she had created to fit in at Hampton Academy had spiraled out of control, and now it was threatening to destroy everything she had worked for. Little did she know, this was only the beginning of her unraveling. Sophia Bennett hadn't always been the kind of girl who turned heads when she walked into a room. In fact, most of her life had been spent trying to blend in, to avoid drawing attention to the things that made her different. She grew up in the quiet suburb of Maple Grove, a place where nothing remarkable ever happened, and people prided themselves on their humble, hard-working lives. For Sophia and her mother, life was a careful balancing act. With her father gone before she turned 3, it had always been just the two of them. Her mother, Anne, worked as a nurse, picking up double shifts whenever she could to make ends meet. They lived in a modest 2-bedroom apartment in an aging complex on the outskirts of town. The walls were thin enough that Sophia could hear the muffled arguments of their neighbors or the sound of the couple upstairs stomping around in their kitchen. Their furniture was a mismatched collection of second-hand finds, and the walls were decorated with fading prints of landscapes that had probably come from a thrift store. Sophia didn't mind it. It was home. But that was before Hampton Academy. The invitation had come in a crisp white envelope with gold embossing, the kind of stationery that looked expensive just to touch. Sophia had been accepted on a full academic scholarship to the prestigious private school, a place where tuition alone cost more than her mom made in a year. Anne had been overjoyed, practically dancing around the kitchen when the letter arrived. For her, it was validation that all her sacrifices had been worth it. "This is your chance, Sophia," her mom had said, clutching her hands tightly. "A real shot at a better future." Sophia had nodded, smiling back, but inside, she was terrified. Hampton Academy was a world away from Maple Grove Middle School. She had seen pictures of the sprawling campus with its ivy-covered buildings and pristine athletic fields. The students who went there looked like they had stepped out of the pages of a fashion magazine. Perfectly styled hair, designer clothes, and an air of confidence that practically radiated from the photos. Her first day at Hampton was like stepping onto another planet. She arrived in her mom's beat-up sit-in, feeling painfully out of place as sleek black SUVs and luxury cars pulled into the parking lot. The other students barely glanced at her, their heads buried in their phones, or chatting in tight-knit groups. Sophia kept her head down, clutching her backpack like a lifeline, as she made her way to her first class. It didn't take long for her to realize just how different she was. At lunch, she overheard a group of girls laughing about a classmate who had been caught wearing fake designer sneakers. "Can you believe it?" one of them said, her voice dripping with disdain. "If you can't afford the real thing, just don't bother." Sophia's cheeks burned as she glanced down at her own scuffed sneakers. She suddenly felt like every flaw, every imperfection, was on display for the entire school to see. That night, as she sat at the small kitchen table with her mom, she decided she couldn't let them see her as the poor scholarship kid from Maple Grove. She had to fit in, no matter what. The transformation started small. Sophia used what little savings she had to buy a few items from the thrift store: designer jeans, a handbag with a recognizable logo, and a pair of sunglasses that looked expensive. She started studying the social media profiles of her classmates, mimicking their style, and even adopting some of their slang. She created her own Instagram account, carefully curating her posts to present an image of a girl who belonged at Hampton Academy. At first, it was exhilarating. The other students started noticing her, complimenting her outfits and inviting her to sit with them at lunch. She wasn't just fitting in, she was thriving. But the lie began to grow, and with it, the pressure. When someone asked her what her parents did, she panicked and blurted out that her father was a CEO. It seemed harmless at the time, a little white lie to keep her cover. But as the questions continued, the story grew more elaborate. Her family owned multiple luxury car dealerships, she told them. They had a summer home in the Hamptons. Her dad was often traveling for business, which explained why no one ever saw him. Each lie came easier than the last, but they came with a cost. Sophia started avoiding school events that might expose her real life. When her friends invited her over to their mansions for sleepovers, she always had an excuse ready. Her mom was strict. She had a big test to study for, or she wasn't feeling well. She became an expert at deflecting questions and redirecting conversations. But the cracks in her facade began to show. There was the time Emma, the queen bee of their social circle, spotted her walking to the bus stop after school. Sophia had quickly ducked into a nearby store, pretending she hadn't seen her. Then there was the fundraiser last fall, when her mom had shown up in scrubs to pick her up early. Sophia had begged her not to come inside, claiming she wasn't feeling well, but she could see the puzzled looks on her classmates' faces as they watched her climb into the old sit-in. Sophia knew it was only a matter of time before someone figured out the truth, but she couldn't bring herself to stop. The lie had become a part of her identity, and the thought of losing everything she had built was unbearable. She convinced herself that she could keep it going, that no one would ever find out. That illusion began to crumble one Friday afternoon when Emma invited her to a small gathering at her house. "It's just a casual thing," Emma had said with a shrug, as if her massive beachfront property was no big deal. Sophia had tried to decline, but Emma was persistent. "Come on, Sophia," Emma said, her tone playful but insistent. "You're always so mysterious. We want to get to know you better." Sophia had no choice but to agree, dreading the inevitable moment when Emma and her friends would start asking questions she couldn't answer. When she arrived at Emma's house, she was immediately overwhelmed. The house was enormous, with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a breathtaking view of the ocean. The other girls were lounging by the pool, sipping sparkling water from crystal glasses. Sophia tried to keep up appearances, laughing at their jokes and pretending to care about the latest trends. But she couldn't shake the feeling that Emma was watching her a little too closely, like she was trying to figure something out. At one point, Emma casually mentioned a new restaurant that had just opened downtown. "It's amazing," Emma said, turning to Sophia. "You should go sometime. I'm sure your family's been there already." Sophia hesitated, unsure how to respond. "Oh yeah," she said finally. "We've been there. It's great." Emma's smile didn't quite reach her eyes. "Really? What did you think of the chef's special?" "I heard it's incredible." Sophia's heart raced as she scrambled for an answer. It was good," she said weakly. "Really good." Emma didn't say anything, but her expression made it clear that she wasn't buying it. For the rest of the afternoon, Sophia felt like she was walking on a tightrope, every word she said carefully calculated to avoid suspicion. By the time she got home that evening, she was exhausted. She collapsed onto her bed, staring up at the ceiling and wondering how much longer she could keep up the charade. The weight of the lie was becoming unbearable, and she couldn't shake the feeling that Emma was onto her. But what scared her most was the thought of what would happen if the truth came out. Would her friends abandon her? Would she become the subject of ridicule and gossip? The fear was paralyzing, but for now, all she could do was keep going and hope for the best. Sophia's days at Hampton Academy were becoming increasingly difficult to navigate. Every lie she told seemed to spawn two more, each one more intricate than the last. She felt like a juggler with too many balls in the air, and she knew it was only a matter of time before one slipped and sent the rest crashing down. The closer her classmates got to her, the harder it became to maintain the illusion of wealth and status. And then came the school's annual charity auction, a prestigious event where students and their families donated extravagant items to raise money for various causes. The auction was always the highlight of the year, not just for its charitable purpose, but for the unspoken competition among the families to outdo one another with their generosity. When Sophia first heard about the event, her stomach twisted into knots. Donations were expected from every student's family, and they were usually lavish, custom jewelry, vacation packages, artwork, or even rare collectibles. Sophia had no idea how she was going to contribute. Her mom's savings were barely enough to cover rent and groceries, let alone something extravagant enough to keep up with the other families at Hampton. She tried to brush it off, telling herself she'd find a way out, but Emma was relentless. "So, what's the Bennett family donating this year?" Emma asked one afternoon, her tone light, but her eyes sharp. She leaned casually against the lockers, her designer handbag slung over one shoulder, exuding the effortless confidence that Sophia could only pretend to have. "Oh, it's a surprise," Sophia replied, forcing a smile. She could feel her heart pounding in her chest. "You'll see." Emma raised an eyebrow, clearly unconvinced. "I can't wait," she said, her voice dripping with curiosity. "Your family always has such exquisite taste." Sophia barely made it through the rest of the day. By the time she got home, she was pacing the small living room, trying to come up with a plan. "What am I going to do?" she muttered to herself, running her hands through her hair. The pressure was unbearable. She couldn't back out of the auction without raising suspicion, but she had nothing to contribute that wouldn't expose the truth about her life. Then, an idea struck her. She thought of Leela, her friend who worked at the thrift store downtown. Leela had always been kind to her, letting her borrow clothes and accessories for special occasions. Maybe, just maybe, she could borrow something from the store to pass off as her family's donation. The next day, Sophia visited Leela at the thrift store, her nerves on edge. The bell above the door jingled as she walked in, and the familiar smell of old books and fabric greeted her. Lila was behind the counter, sorting through a box of donated items. "Hey, Sophia," Leela said with a smile. "What brings you here?" Sophia hesitated, feeling a pang of guilt. She hated lying to Leela, who was one of the few genuine friends she had, but she didn't see any other option. "I need a favor," she said, trying to sound casual. "There's this school event, and I was wondering if I could borrow something special, just for the evening." Leela tilted her head, curious. "What kind of special?" Sophia's eyes scanned the store until they landed on a handbag displayed on a shelf behind the counter. It was a limited edition piece from a well-known designer, something that would fit right in at the Hampton auction. "That," she said, pointing to the bag. "It's perfect." Leela glanced at the bag and then back at Sophia. "You sure? That's part of the new inventory. It's not even officially for sale yet." "It's just for one night," Sophia said quickly. "I'll take good care of it, I promise." Leela hesitated for a moment before nodding. "All right, but be careful with it. That bag's worth a small fortune." Sophia felt a wave of relief wash over her. She thanked Leela and left the store, clutching the bag like it was a lifeline. For the first time in days, she felt like she could breathe again. She had a plan. It wasn't perfect, but it would buy her more time. As the auction approached, Sophia threw herself into preparations. She carefully crafted a story about how her father had acquired the bag during a business trip to Paris. She rehearsed the details over and over, making sure her story was airtight. But no matter how much she prepared, she couldn't shake the feeling that something would go wrong. The night of the auction arrived, and Sophia dressed meticulously. She wore a sleek black dress borrowed from Leila, paired with simple pearl earrings that had once belonged to her grandmother. When she arrived at the school, the auditorium was already buzzing with excitement. Tables were set up around the room, each one displaying an array of luxurious items donated by the students' families. Sophia's hands trembled as she handed over the handbag to the event coordinator. "This is from the Bennett family," she said, keeping her voice steady. The coordinator nodded and added the bag to the display, unaware of the storm brewing just beneath the surface. As the evening went on, Sophia did her best to blend in. She laughed at her classmates' jokes, made polite conversation with their parents, and even managed to keep up with Emma's endless probing questions. But when the bidding for her donated handbag began, her nerves reached a breaking point. The MC introduced the bag with a flourish, describing it as a rare and exquisite piece donated by the esteemed Bennett family. The bidding started at $5,000 and quickly escalated. Sophia felt like she was watching from outside her own body, detached and numb, as the numbers climbed higher and higher. But then, just as the bidding reached $8,000, a woman in the back of the room stood up. "Excuse me," she said, her voice cutting through the chatter like a knife. "Isn't that bag from the downtown thrift and vintage shop?" The room fell silent, and all eyes turned to Sophia. She felt her heart stop as she struggled to process what was happening. The woman's gaze was piercing, her expression filled with skepticism. "I'm pretty sure I saw that exact bag there last week," the woman continued. "It even has a small scratch on the handle." Sophia's blood ran cold. She glanced at the bag, and there it was, the tiny imperfection she had hoped no one would notice. Panic surged through her, and she opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. Her classmates stared at her, their faces a mix of confusion and curiosity. Emma stepped forward, her smile sharp and knowing. "Is there something you'd like to share with us, Sophia?" she asked, her voice dripping with feigned innocence. Sophia felt trapped, like an animal cornered by predators. The walls of the auditorium seemed to close in around her, and the weight of all her lies threatened to crush her. She could feel the eyes of her classmates, their parents, and her teachers all fixed on her, waiting for an explanation. She began, her voice barely above a whisper, but before she could say anything more, the MC intervened. "Let's move on to our next item," he said quickly, trying to diffuse the tension. "Thank you to the Bennett family for their generous donation." The moment passed, but the damage was done. As the auction continued, Sophia slipped out of the auditorium, her face burning with humiliation. Outside, the cool night air hit her like a slap in the face. She leaned against the wall, gasping for breath, as tears streamed down her cheeks. Her phone buzzed in her clutch, and she pulled it out with shaking hands. It was a message from Leila. "Sophia, what's going on? Someone just posted about the auction, and they're saying that bag is from the thrift store. Please tell me this is a misunderstanding." Sophia stared at the screen, her mind racing. She had no idea how to respond. The life she had built at Hampton Academy was crumbling before her eyes, and she didn't know how to stop it. For the first time, she realized the full weight of what she had done, not just the lies she had told, but the trust she had betrayed. She wiped her tears, but they kept coming. Deep down, she knew there was no going back. The truth was out there now, and it was only a matter of time before the consequences caught up with her. The days after the charity auction were a waking nightmare for Sophia. Whispers followed her down the hallways of Hampton Academy, buzzing around her like an angry hive. No one said anything to her face, not yet, but the sidelong glances and hushed conversations were impossible to ignore. Every time her phone buzzed with a notification, her stomach clenched in fear. She avoided checking social media, terrified of what she might find. The facade she had carefully built was unraveling, and she could feel the threads slipping through her fingers. By lunchtime on Monday, the silence broke. Sophia had barely taken a seat in the corner of the cafeteria when Emma strolled over, flanked by her usual entourage. Emma's smile was sweet, but her eyes sparkled with malice. "Hey, Sophia," she said, her voice loud enough to draw the attention of the surrounding tables. "We were just talking about the auction. That bag you donated. It was such a unique choice." Sophia's pulse quickened. "Thanks," she mumbled, staring down at her tray. She could feel the weight of everyone's eyes on her, waiting for what would happen next. Emma leaned in slightly, her tone taking on a feigned innocence. "You know, some people were saying they recognized it from that thrift store downtown. Isn't that funny? I mean, what are the odds?" Sophia's hands gripped the edges of her tray. She could feel the heat rising to her cheeks, her carefully composed exterior threatening to crack. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, her voice trembling despite her best efforts to sound dismissive. "Really?" Emma said, tilting her head as if considering Sophia's words. "Because Mrs. Hawthorne, she's on the auction committee, you know, said it was definitely from there. And there's even a post online now. Do you want to see it?" Before Sophia could respond, Emma pulled out her phone and swiped to a photo of the bag, now circulating on one of the school's gossip accounts. The caption read, "Bennett family's luxury donation spotted at downtown thrift. What's the real story?" The post already had dozens of comments, most of them mocking or speculating about the situation. Sophia's breath caught in her throat. She pushed her chair back abruptly, the screech of metal on tile echoing through the cafeteria. Without a word, she grabbed her tray and dumped it in the nearest bin before hurrying out. Behind her, she could hear the low hum of laughter and murmurs, Emma's voice rising above it all. Her feet carried her to the nearest bathroom, where she locked herself in a stall and sank onto the closed toilet seat. Tears blurred her vision as she clutched her phone, her fingers trembling. Leela had sent another message, more insistent this time. "Sophia, I need to talk to you. People are asking questions and I don't know what to say. What's going on?" Sophia felt like she was suffocating. Her lies were closing in on her, the walls of her deception squeezing tighter with each passing moment. She couldn't bear to face Leela, not after dragging her into this mess. And she certainly couldn't confront Emma, whose relentless probing had exposed cracks in her carefully constructed image. For the first time, Sophia truly felt the weight of her choices pressing down on her. She had wanted so desperately to fit in, to belong, that she hadn't thought about what it would cost her. By the time the final bell rang, Sophia was exhausted. She gathered her things and left the school as quickly as possible, avoiding the usual social interactions. But as she walked toward the bus stop, a familiar voice called out behind her, "Sophia, wait up." She turned to see Emma jogging toward her, her designer bag swinging at her side. For a moment, Sophia considered running, but she knew it would only make things worse. She stopped and waited, bracing herself for whatever was coming. Emma caught up to her. A smug smile plastered across her face. "You're a hard girl to track down," she said. "I just wanted to clear something up." "What do you want, Emma?" Sophia said, her voice flat. She was too tired to keep up the pretense. Emma's smile widened. "Oh, nothing much. I just thought you might want to explain. You know, your little donation situation. People are curious, and I figured you wouldn't want them jumping to the wrong conclusions." Sophia clenched her fists at her sides, her nails digging into her palms. "There's nothing to explain," she said, her voice low but firm. "It was a misunderstanding, that's all." "A misunderstanding," Emma repeated, her tone dripping with sarcasm. "Right. Well, I hope you clear it up soon. You wouldn't want people thinking you're, I don't know, a liar." With that, Emma turned and walked away, leaving Sophia standing alone. The word liar echoed in her mind, sharp and stinging. She knew Emma was toying with her, but the worst part was that she wasn't entirely wrong. Sophia spent the rest of the evening in her room, trying to figure out what to do. She couldn't ignore the situation any longer. It was spiraling out of control. The gossip was spreading faster than she could contain it, and the more she tried to distance herself from it, the worse it seemed to get. Finally, she made a decision. She grabbed her phone and called Lila. The line rang twice before Lila picked up. "Sophia," Lila said, her voice cautious. "What's going on? People are saying some crazy stuff about that bag." Sophia took a deep breath, the words catching in her throat. "I messed up, Lila," she admitted. "I used the bag for the auction, and now everyone knows where it came from. I didn't mean for this to happen. I didn't know what else to do." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Why didn't you just tell them the truth?" Lila asked, her voice soft but tinged with disappointment. Sophia wiped at her eyes, tears spilling over despite her efforts to hold them back. "Because I couldn't. You don't understand what it's like at that school. If they knew the truth about me, they'd never let me live it down. I'd be a joke." "Maybe," Lila said gently, "but at least it would have been your truth. Now you're caught in a lie, and it's hurting you even more." Sophia didn't know how to respond. She felt exposed, vulnerable in a way she hadn't allowed herself to feel in months. Lila was right, of course, but that didn't make it any easier to face the consequences of her actions. The next morning, Sophia walked into school with her head held high, though her heart was pounding in her chest. She had decided that it was time to face the truth, no matter how painful it might be. When she reached the cafeteria during lunch, she spotted Emma sitting at her usual table, surrounded by their classmates. Taking a deep breath, Sophia walked over and stood in front of the table. The chatter died down as everyone turned to look at her, their expressions a mix of curiosity and surprise. "I have something to say," Sophia began, her voice shaking but determined. "I lied. The bag I donated to the auction wasn't from my family. It was from a thrift store, and I borrowed it without telling the owner. I lied because I was scared. I didn't want you to see me for who I really am." The room was silent, the weight of her words hanging in the air. For a moment, no one said anything. Then Emma leaned back in her chair, a triumphant smirk on her face. "Well," Emma said, her tone mocking, "that's quite the confession. I guess we all know who you really are now." But before Sophia could respond, another voice spoke up. "You know what, Emma?" At least she had the guts to admit it. It was Lila, standing at the edge of the room. She walked over and stood next to Sophia, her expression defiant. "That's more than I can say for most people." Emma's smirk faltered, and the murmurs around the room grew louder. Sophia felt a surge of relief and gratitude. For the first time in months, she felt like she wasn't alone. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but at least she was finally walking it on her own terms. The cafeteria buzzed with a mixture of disbelief and muted admiration after Sophia's confession. She felt her chest tighten as dozens of pairs of eyes remained fixed on her. Lila stood beside her like an unshakable pillar of support, but Sophia couldn't ignore the lingering tension in the air. The truth was out, and though she had taken the first step toward redemption, the road ahead felt impossibly steep. She turned and walked away from the cafeteria, her pulse pounding in her ears, Lila trailing close behind. As they stepped into the hallway, Sophia could still feel the weight of her classmates' stares burning into her back. Lila reached out and touched her arm gently. "Hey, you did the right thing," she said softly. "It's not going to be easy, but at least now you're free from the lies." "Free?" Sophia echoed, her voice shaky. "I don't feel free. I feel exposed. Like everyone's going to tear me apart now." Lila gave her a small, encouraging smile. "People will talk, sure, but you owned up to it. That's more than most of them would have done." Sophia nodded, appreciating Lila's support, but the knot in her stomach remained. She couldn't shake the feeling that things were about to get worse before they got better. The rest of the school day passed in a blur. Whispers followed her from classroom to classroom, and even the teachers seemed to regard her with a mixture of surprise and curiosity. By the time the final bell rang, Sophia felt like a tightly wound spring ready to snap. She avoided eye contact as she made her way to the bus stop, clutching her books to her chest like a shield. The ride home was mercifully quiet, but her thoughts were anything but. She replayed the events of the day over and over, wondering if she could have handled things differently. Part of her wished she had just kept the lie going, but another part knew that the truth would have come out eventually. At least now, she thought, she could start rebuilding, if anyone was willing to let her. When she got home, her mother was waiting for her in the small kitchen. Ann Bennett had always been a no-nonsense woman, her years as a nurse hardening her against the challenges life had thrown their way. But as Sophia walked through the door, Ann's stern expression softened. "I heard about what happened at school," Ann said gently, setting down the dish towel she had been holding. "Are you okay?" Sophia hesitated, then shook her head. "Not really," she admitted. "Everyone knows now. About the bag, about us, about everything." Ann stepped forward and pulled Sophia into a hug. "I'm sorry you felt like you had to lie," she said. "I know how hard it's been for you, trying to fit in there. But you don't have to be someone you're not, Sophia. You're enough just as you are." Tears welled up in Sophia's eyes as she buried her face in her mother's shoulder. "I didn't want them to think I was a loser," she whispered. "I just wanted to belong." Ann sighed, stroking her daughter's hair. "Belonging doesn't mean pretending to be something you're not. The people who matter will accept you for who you are, not for what you have." Sophia nodded, though she wasn't sure she believed it. Still, her mother's words gave her a small measure of comfort. She spent the rest of the evening in her room, staring out the window as the sun dipped below the horizon. She knew she couldn't undo the damage she had done, but maybe, just maybe, she could start to make things right. The next morning, Sophia walked into school with her head held high, determined to face whatever came her way. The whispers and stares were still there, but she refused to let them intimidate her. She went about her day as normally as she could, though she couldn't help but feel a pang of anxiety every time someone approached her. By lunchtime, the tension reached its peak. Sophia was sitting alone at a corner table, picking at her food, when Emma walked up with a smug expression on her face. Behind her, a small group of students had gathered, watching the interaction with keen interest. "Well, well," Emma said, her voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "If it isn't the thrift store queen herself. How does it feel to finally come clean, Sophia?" Sophia looked up, meeting Emma's gaze with a calm she didn't entirely feel. "It feels better than lying," she said simply. "Maybe you should try it sometime." A ripple of laughter spread through the crowd, and Emma's smirk faltered. For a moment, she looked genuinely taken aback, but she quickly recovered. "Cute," she said, her tone icy. "But don't think this makes you some kind of hero. You lie to everyone. You don't get to just walk away from that." Sophia stood, her heart pounding but her voice steady. "I know I messed up," she said, her words directed not just at Emma, but at everyone watching. "I lied because I was scared. I thought if you knew the truth about me, you wouldn't want me around. But I see now that lying didn't make me belong. It just made everything worse. I'm not asking for forgiveness, but I am asking for a chance to prove I can be better." The room fell silent, the weight of Sophia's words hanging in the air. Emma opened her mouth to respond, but before she could, a voice from the crowd cut her off. "I think that's pretty brave," Leela said, stepping forward. She crossed her arms and looked around at the gathered students. "How many of you can say you've never lied to fit in?" Sophia made a mistake, but at least she's owning up to it. A murmur of agreement spread through the group, and Emma's expression darkened. Without another word, she turned and walked away, her entourage trailing after her. Sophia let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding, feeling the wave of relief wash over her. Over the next few weeks, Things slowly began to improve. Some students were more forgiving than others, but Sophia found that the ones who mattered most were willing to give her a second chance. She started spending more time with Leila, who introduced her to a new group of friends that were refreshingly genuine. They didn't care about designer clothes or extravagant vacations. They cared about honesty and kindness, qualities Sophia was learning to value in herself as well. The school's administration also took notice of Sophia's situation. The principal, Mr. Carter, called her into his office one afternoon to discuss what had happened. "Sophia," he said, his tone kind but firm, "I want you to know that we don't tolerate bullying at this school. If you ever feel like you're being targeted, please come to me." "Thank you," Sophia said, surprised by his support. "I appreciate that." Mr. Carter nodded. "But I also want to talk about something else. Your story has highlighted an important issue at our school. The pressure students feel to live up to unrealistic expectations. I think we can do better as a community, and I'd like your help in starting that conversation." Sophia was taken aback, but agreed to help. Together, they organized a series of workshops and discussions about self-acceptance and the dangers of materialism. The events were surprisingly well received, and Sophia found herself connecting with students she had never spoken to before. By the end of the semester, Sophia felt like a different person. She was no longer weighed down by the burden of her lies, and though the road to redemption had been rocky, it had also been transformative. She had learned the hard way that true belonging came not from pretending to be someone else, but from embracing who she really was. One afternoon, as she sat on the steps of the school, Leila joined her, handing her a cup of coffee. "You've come a long way, you know," Leila said, smiling. Sophia took a sip and nodded. "Yeah," she said, her voice thoughtful, "but I couldn't have done it without you." Leila laughed. "Don't get all sentimental on me now." Sophia smiled, feeling a sense of peace she hadn't felt in months. For the first time, she wasn't looking over her shoulder, waiting for her lies to catch up with her. She was finally free. As the semester drew to a close, the fallout from Sophia's confession had settled into something she could finally process. The initial storm of gossip had passed, and while the experience left scars, it also gave Sophia something she hadn't expected: clarity. For the first time, she wasn't consumed by the constant anxiety of maintaining a false image. The weight of the lies she carried for so long had been replaced by a quiet determination to rebuild her life with authenticity. On a crisp Friday morning, Sophia sat in the school library, flipping through the pages of her notebook. The sun streamed through the tall windows, casting golden light across the room. She was working on a draft for the school-wide assembly that Principal Carter had asked her to help organize. The theme: redefining success. The power of being real. It was ironic, really. A few months ago, she had been the poster child for pretending. Now she was about to stand in front of the entire student body to talk about what she'd learned. It was a daunting prospect, but she felt ready, or at least ready enough. Her phone buzzed beside her, and she glanced at the screen. It was a message from Leila. "You're going to kill it at the assembly. Don't overthink it." Sophia smiled, her heart warming at the thought of her friend's unwavering support. Leila had been her rock through everything, never judging her for her mistakes. In fact, Leila had become more than a friend. She was Sophia's anchor to reality, constantly reminding her of what truly mattered. As the days passed, word about the upcoming assembly spread through the school. While some students were indifferent, others were intrigued. Rumors circulated that Sophia would address the auction incident directly, and there was a palpable sense of anticipation. Emma, predictably, rolled her eyes at the buzz, but even she seemed curious enough to attend. The morning of the assembly, Sophia woke up early, her nerves frayed but her resolve intact. She stood in front of the mirror, carefully brushing her hair and choosing an outfit that felt true to herself. A simple blouse and jeans. No designer labels, no flashy accessories. Just her. Her mom knocked on the door and poked her head inside. "Ready for your big moment?" Anne asked, her voice warm with encouragement. "As ready as I'll ever be," Sophia replied, managing a small smile. Anne stepped into the room and placed a hand on her shoulder. "Sophia, I'm proud of you. Not because you're giving a speech, but because you've chosen to be honest. That takes real courage." The words settled over Sophia like a blanket, comforting and grounding. "Thanks, Mom," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. When she arrived at school, the auditorium was already filling up. Students shuffled into their seats, their chatter filling the air. Sophia stood backstage, clutching her note cards. She peeked through the curtain and spotted Leela in the front row, giving her a thumbs up. Principal Carter approached her, his kind smile easing some of her tension. "You're going to do great," he said. "Just speak from the heart." Sophia nodded, taking a deep breath. Moments later, the principal walked onto the stage, tapping the microphone to quiet the crowd. After a brief introduction, he turned to her. "And now, I'd like to welcome a student who has shown remarkable growth and courage, Sophia Bennett." The applause was polite but subdued. Sophia stepped onto the stage, her heart pounding in her chest. She stood at the podium, looking out at the sea of faces, and for a moment, she froze. Then she saw Leela's encouraging smile, and something inside her steadied. "Hi, everyone," she began, her voice shaky, but gaining strength. "For those of you who don't know me, I'm Sophia Bennett. And for those of you who do, well, you probably know me for the wrong reasons." A ripple of laughter spread through the crowd, breaking the tension. Sophia smiled, feeling a little more at ease. "A few months ago, I made a mistake, a big one. I lied about who I was because I thought the truth wasn't good enough. I wanted so badly to fit in, to be accepted, that I created a version of myself that wasn't real. And for a while, it worked. People saw me as someone I wasn't, and I thought that was enough." She paused, letting her words sink in. But then the truth came out, as it always does. And let me tell you, it was one of the most humiliating experiences of my life. I felt exposed, vulnerable, and completely alone. The room was silent now, every eye fixed on her. "But here's the thing," she continued. "In losing the fake version of myself, I found something I didn't even realize I was missing. My real self. And while it hasn't been easy, it's been worth it. Because for the first time, I'm not pretending. I'm just me." Sophia glanced down at her note cards, then set them aside. "I don't want to lecture you. I just want to share what I've learned. We live in a world where we're constantly pressured to be perfect, to look a certain way, to have certain things. But that kind of perfection is an illusion. It's exhausting, and it's not worth sacrificing who you are." She took a deep breath, her voice steady now. "I've learned that success isn't about fitting into someone else's mold. It's about being true to yourself, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. And it's about surrounding yourself with people who see your worth, not your wealth." As she finished, the audience erupted into applause, louder and more genuine than she had expected. Sophia stepped off the stage, her chest swelling with a mix of relief and pride. Lila was waiting for her in the wings, her smile wide. "You killed it," Leela said, pulling her into a hug. "Thanks," Sophia replied, her voice thick with emotion. "I couldn't have done it without you." In the weeks that followed, the assembly sparked a wave of conversations among the students. For the first time, people started talking openly about the pressures they faced and the ways they had tried to cope. The school even launched a new initiative, Be Real, aimed at promoting authenticity and self-acceptance. Workshops, mentorship programs, and peer support groups became a regular part of campus life. Sophia threw herself into the initiative, using her experience to help others who felt the same pressure to conform. She found a sense of purpose in her work, and though she still faced moments of doubt, she felt stronger with every step she took. Her relationships also began to change. While some classmates, like Emma, kept their distance, others approached her with unexpected kindness. One afternoon, a girl named Mia, who had always been quiet and reserved, stopped her in the hallway. "Hey, Sophia," Maya said, her voice hesitant. "I just wanted to say, your speech really resonated with me. I've been struggling with some stuff, and hearing you talk about it made me feel less alone." Sophia felt a lump form in her throat. "Thank you," she said. "That means a lot." By the end of the school year, Sophia had not only repaired many of the relationships she had strained, but also built new ones. She no longer felt the need to hide her modest background or downplay her struggles. Instead, she embraced them as part of who she was, a girl who had made mistakes but was learning to grow from them. On the last day of school, Sophia and Leela sat on the steps of the auditorium, reflecting on how far they had come. "You know," Leela said, nudging her playfully, "if someone had told me a year ago that you'd be the face of an honesty campaign, I wouldn't have believed them." Sophia laughed, the sound light and genuine. "Me neither," she admitted. "But I guess life has a way of surprising you." As the sun set over the campus, Sophia felt a profound sense of peace. The journey had been painful and messy, but it had also been transformative. She wasn't the same girl who had walked into Hampton Academy with a head full of lies. She was stronger now, more confident, and most importantly, unapologetically herself. For the first time in a long time, she looked forward to the future, not as a version of someone else, but as Sophia Bennett, exactly as she was.